Viewer and listener warning. This episode discusses topics which may be triggering for some. We will discuss self-harm, suicide, guilt, shame, and depression. If you or a loved one is experiencing a mental health crisis, please call the National Suicide Lifeline at 1-800-273-TALK or 988 come July 2022. Welcome to Mental Health Helps, where we heal, educate, listen, prevent, and support through conversations with experts, activists, and people's personal stories. My name is Brandy Vega. Welcome to the series. Today we are talking about learning to breathe again. This is a book that was written by Lark Dean Galley, and she lost her son to suicide. This is something that I'm very passionate about. Lark, thank you so much for joining us and being here today.
I really appreciate it. And as soon as you mentioned that you're going to be talking about suicide prevention, I wanted to be involved.
Well, the nicest thing happened is when I almost lost my daughter to suicide just a few weeks back, I put out a message on social media, and pretty soon my phone blew up and we got in touch, and you asked for my address. And a couple of days later, this book arrived in the mail, and I opened it up and I sat down in my bedroom and I just read the whole thing. I just sat there and I read it all. It took me, I don't know, a few hours. And I was just kind of crying and just, I felt so thankful that I had a second chance, because you didn't get a second chance. Tell us what happened with your son.
So just 2 years ago, the 2-year anniversary was just earlier this week, my 19-year-old son took his life. And the hard part for us is that we didn't see it coming. We had no clues. You know, you kind of think, oh, they isolate, they don't have friends, they stay in their room and they don't do anything. He was the complete opposite. He was a freshman at the University of Utah in the mechanical engineering department. He had a brilliant mind. He'd always wanted to do that. And he had friends and hobbies. He had things to look forward to. And yet there were several things that sort of came all together at once and just tipped him over the edge. And it wasn't until afterwards that I found out from his friends that he had been struggling. And so it just broke my heart that his friends knew that he had been struggling. And a couple of them mentioned that they wanted to talk to me, but they didn't know how. And so I just wanted to make a plea to friends of kids or anyone. Yeah. If you hear of someone who's struggling, don't be afraid to reach out for resources. And even the Utah Suicide Line, there are probably other lines where you can communicate. Yes, yes.
You know, now that you mention that, when my daughter attempted suicide a few weeks back, we had no idea. Mm-hmm. I mean, we had a normal conversation. I could tell she was a little bit upset over school. We were looking at her schedule and picking classes. I could tell she was a little upset, definitely not enough to attempt to take her life. And this is 9:30. We pray, I give her a hug, she goes to bed, we go to bed. And at 11 o'clock, about our doorbell's ringing. And I'm like, who's coming to the house at 11 o'clock? And I had my husband jump up, and he goes in there, and there's 2 police officers at our door. And they say, are you the parents of Kaya? And I was like, what is this about? What did she do? Like, did she do something illegal? Did she sneak out? What's going on? They said, you need to go check on her right now. And I'm like, what? What? You know, it's just hard for me to understand. And so when you talk about friends knowing, she had only confided in her other 14-year-old friend. This friend, who's very introverted, she called the police. She called the police when Kaya said, I'm going to kill myself and goodbye. And she goes, I'm going to contact somebody. And my daughter said, no, 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 don't call anybody. Don't contact anybody. But her friend had enough courage to call the police. And if they hadn't come and knocked on my door, we probably would have found her in the morning. And so I'm so thankful for a friend who reached out. And I know it was very hard for her buddy to do that. And I think, you know, what you're saying, guys, if you're out there, if you've heard somebody, and not even a teenager, adults, if you hear them, I see it sometimes on social media, somebody just saying, man, life's too hard. And I reach out right away, because sometimes we don't care about living for ourselves, but we're willing to live for somebody else. And the other thing is, I know her friend was petrified that Kaya was going to be mad at her for calling, and she's not. She's thankful, because at the end of the day, they didn't really she didn't really want to die. I asked her when she woke up, "Are you glad you woke up?" "Yeah, I'm glad I woke up."
They don't do it out of spite, and I don't think they really understand the ramifications of their actions. A lot of times people who take their own lives feel like they're a burden to their family, and it would be a way for them to ease the pain of their family, and they're also looking for a way to just take the pain away. They're just, a lot of times they just hurt so much inside. It's you know, it's something that a lot of people can't understand unless they've been in that situation where it's a psychological pain and you don't know if it will ever stop.
Yeah, it's hard. So tell me, once it happened, could you look back and say, oh, maybe I missed this? Or the hard thing for me was like, yeah, of course there's signs. They're the same signs that go along with puberty and junior high and just being a teenager.
And being a teenager, yes, exactly. Here's something that happened 3.5 years before he died. He was 15 going on 16, starting his sophomore year, and his father was having the parental discussion. You know, the one where it's kind of like, buck up, son, you know, grades matter. You're going into now the 9th grade, going into sophomore, you need to be attentive to your grades and you need to do this, this, this. My husband's ex-military, you know, we run a tight ship at home. So you can imagine that's kind of the way the kids have been raised, very strict. And my husband had the presence of mind and training in the military to see that my son started to detach. And my husband said, "Are you feeling suicidal?" Which I don't think I would have said that. That wouldn't have been in my mind, but he's had that training. And he could see that my son was detaching. And my son Christian said, "Yes, I am," which is brave of him that he was willing to do that. So my husband came in from the outside and he said, "Christian's struggling. He says he's suicidal. Will you stay with him? I'm going to call the suicide hotline. The military has a special line." We got my son set up with a therapist the next day. I had my son commit to me that he was okay for the night, and then took him in the next day. And over the course of a couple months, you know, he had this talk. He came up with a plan to make sure that if he was feeling suicidal, what he could do. Yes, exactly. At the end of 2 months, he said, "Mom, I'm good."
Yeah.
Here is my greatest regret, is that from that time he said, "Mom, I'm good," to the day he killed himself, I never thought to ask him, "How's your mental health? How are you doing?" I never thought to ask that.
That's hard. I know for me, when she did that, you know, she went to uni the first time at 12. And then we tried counseling. She was like, "This is the biggest waste of time. I don't want to be here. I'm not going to tell her anything. Please get me out of this." We did maybe 6 weeks and got her out. The medication, I don't like it. I'm not taking it. You can't make me take it. Okay. And, you know, for the first 6 months, you're like, how's your mental health? Are you feeling suicidal? On a scale of 1 to 10, where are you at today? And we kind of went through this with her. And then, you know, the last year and a half, you just kind of go, oh, she's doing okay. Then we knew a little bit before, maybe she's not. And then we tried to get in to see a counselor, but it was so hard. So I know for me that I had a lot of guilt. How did you feel when this first happened? What was your, I mean, besides the pain and the heartache?
And the shock and the denial, the sincere denial that oh no, he'll walk in that door. Because I didn't see him after he died, right? I only had the policeman coming to my office and letting me know, and that was a shock.
But your husband found him.
My husband found him, yes. And my husband's battle-hardened Army colonel. This brought back all the PTSD. He started having hallucinations about the blood, and he struggled. He blamed himself for the situation, and it was very hard. For me, I was angry. I was in denial, didn't want to talk about it, and immediately I began to think, my son hates me. I was a terrible mom. And I started thinking all of these things and looking at the grief and the guilt, and there were some things that I learned over time, and one of them is that our definition of guilt is completely off. If you look at the definition of guilt, it's the intent to harm. And I know you didn't intend to harm your daughter. I didn't intend to harm my son. We have regrets. I have a lot of regrets. But I no longer carry the guilt because I had no intent to harm my son.
You loved him.
I loved him. We struggled, and that's the whole point. That's part of the book, is that, it wasn't these rainbows and the loving son-mother relationship. It was a hard relationship. We argued almost every day of his life, and it was so hard for me. And yet, I want to tell people, parents, that there's hope, that as I write that, I'm looking back and saying, what would I have done differently? What are the lessons that I've learned now? Please don't make those same mistakes that I made.
And what do you feel those mistakes were?
I didn't allow him to feel completely accepted by me. We have this conditional love, even though as parents we think, oh, we love you no matter what. I would change, and I have changed the way I parent, so that now it's not from a dictatorial standpoint. It's more of a guiding standpoint, allowing the kids to make their own decisions and have the consequences of those decisions, but also to be their advocate and guide them versus saying, you will do this.
Right. What would you tell other parents, one who are in your situation? My cousin was murdered, and it ended up, my aunt and uncle got divorced. Like, the pain and the grief was so significant because, one, anytime somebody commits suicide, for the most part, there's usually an ignition source, right? It's like they've thought about it, they've been planning it, they have something, and if this happens, I'll do that.
Yes.
If my mom tells me to do something, if my dad yells at me, if my sibling does this, if somebody leaves, or and so whatever that ignition source that causes them to actually act on it, then it becomes a blame game.
Yes.
You said your husband felt guilty because the night before
he had had a conversation with my son, right?
Yeah.
Exactly. So there's so much involved with this, especially a suicide, because there's the why questions. Why wasn't I enough? Why couldn't he talk to me? Why this? Why that? And there's so much wrapped up into that. What I found out later from a therapist is once they have a plan, a lot of times potential suicide victims, they get happier. So you think they're doing well when in reality they've got a plan, and when it gets bad, they'll just like check out. Yep, they're done. And that's what, in hindsight, I see with my son. He seemed to be doing better, but he had come up with a plan, and he had resolved that when it gets too hard, life gets too hard, I'm out. And a couple of those triggers were that 2 weeks prior, he had been in a car accident. There was a lot of snow. He was driving to school, following a little bit too closely, rear-ended someone. And so we were, as parents, he's 19, almost 20.
Yeah.
And we're making him kind of step up and deal with the insurance company, which, of course, he doesn't really want to, but we're sort of putting some
adulting.
Yes, welcome to the club, right?
Right.
And he's pushing back a little bit, but we're kind of pushing on that. And then my husband confronted him that night about his grades, and he admitted that his grades were slipping, that it was getting harder. And that's another thing. A lot of suicides occur in the spring and the fall, which you would think it's not the right time, but that's when midterms are. And so a lot of kids are thinking they're failing, and they're just like, what's the point? I'm going to fail anyway.
It blows my mind because that was part of it with Kaya. School is hard. I'm struggling. We said pandemic doesn't help, but even like college, and it doesn't matter what time of the year. For kids, they look at that and it's consuming them. For us, we look at it and go, it's just a grade. Like,
right.
I failed a few classes and I'm still here today. And but it seems like
right, as adults and mentally healthy adults, we can look at the bigger picture. But when someone is suffering as an adult, or especially as a youth, their brains are not developed, right? They are not in their right mind. That's what I say about anyone who ends up taking their own life or attempting. They are not in their right mind because they've overcome that natural barrier to self-preservation.
Right.
And that's really hard to do. They've got to be in a place where they are hurting. And if we can look at the people that attempt or that do follow through with a suicide with compassion, instead of trying to condemn them and make suicide a taboo topic and shame and push people down, then more people who are hurting can feel safe in coming forward and asking for help and feeling compassion.
Right. So with your relationship with your husband, because you admitted that you and Christian fought a lot, they had that conversation that night, probably siblings. How did you reconcile it after his death and get your family maybe closer instead of?
So a couple of things. First of all, everyone dealt with their grief differently. We're all on different levels. My husband and one of my daughters has not read my book. They can't go there. I am very open, a little bit too open for some of the family members, right? But I feel that that's what I need to do to heal. The other thing that I realized was that very quickly, we want to assign blame. Because if we have someone to blame, then it can be okay in some ways in our minds. It's not us. Yes, exactly. And so at first my husband was kind of blaming himself for that conversation, and then he just started to kind of blame a lot of people, and that's normal. He blamed me because my relationship wasn't better with my son, and he blamed an aunt because she didn't come in from out of state to his high school graduation. I mean, just your mind's not right. You know what I mean? It's just he's just like, I know this is not logical, but I'm just trying to find something to hold on to. My younger daughter, who was very close to Christian, she blamed me, right? Because she needed a place to put her anger. And so it came out on Mom, and it was hard for us for a while. I wanted to blame, I wanted to blame my husband or whoever out there. I want to blame Christian, which is hard because he's both the victim and the person who's getting my blame, right? And I very quickly learned that the blame was going to rip up our family and that we needed to remove all the blame. There was no blaming Christian. There's no blaming another person or, somebody who didn't see it or a friend. There's just no blame. It just is.
You maybe have to, I've just been learning about radical acceptance.
Yes.
And maybe that's what it had to be. It's like, this is what it is. We have to radically accept it, stop doing blame, and just figure out how to move forward.
Because from what I understand, that parents, couples who lose a child, suicide or however, that increases their chance of divorce by 30%. So already, marriage is difficult enough. And then where you're going through a loss of a child, everything is magnified. And it kind of came to the head for my husband and me because he's checked out. And I was just like, I can't do this. You are completely like the PTSD checked out type thing. And we had to have a really hard conversation. And as soon as we were open and honest with each other, we began to realize that we were both going through the same thing, through the grief and pain. And if we hadn't been open about that, we would have just had to separate because we didn't understand where the other person was in all of this.
So if somebody's going through that right now, what do you think was the tipping point? Just talking about it and saying, how can we come together? Because right now, if a parent or a family is going through it, they need help because it will eat up the relationship and you will end up apart.
We came to realize, because we were really open and honest exactly about what we were feeling, we felt the same thing in that we felt that we were failures as parents, failures as spouses, failures in every aspect of life. We both have higher education degrees. We both accomplished a lot of things in our life. And yet I will tell you that this loss, the suicide, has humbled us so much and stripped us of everything that we ever thought to be proud of. That there's no pride. There's nothing. We are just so humbled down to our core. And in admitting to each other that we felt like nothing. And that,
because nothing else matters at that moment.
Nothing else matters.
No other achievement, no other accomplishment, no business, no degree. Nothing matters when your loved one leaves.
Exactly. I see these shows about parents who lose a child, and a lot of times one of the parents just spins out of control. And not having gone through that experience before and watching that, I would say, buck up, put on your big girl pants, just push through it, right?
Isn't it funny how we all do that until we're going through it?
There's no pushing through it.
No.
There were days when I was happy to get out of the bed. And however I wanted to show up for the day, that was okay with me. And to allow me and give myself grace, to allow each member of the family, wherever they were in their grief, and not to push them, not to push my agenda, and say, let's go. Just to allow them wherever they were. That's very important.
I think one of the things, again, with suicide is what you said. You just felt like a failure. I felt like a failure. And I honestly believe every single person, if friends or whoever's close, you feel like a failure because you couldn't do it. And that's one of the hardest things to push through. And getting humble and saying, I think that's why we don't talk about it. I think that's why we keep it a secret, because one of the people I'm talking to comes from a very, very wealthy family. Another person comes from a very low income family. It doesn't matter, race, age, religion, but none of it matters. It's something within them where they make a choice and they choose to do it no matter how hard we try. Have you seen the movie Beautiful Boy?
I haven't.
Well, in this movie, it's a true story about a son who's addicted to alcohol and drugs, and the dad tries and tries and tries, and no matter what, and finally at the end it's like you have to just almost relinquish and say, I love you, I've done everything, but you get to choose. And as a parent, we want to force our choices on our children and say, you're choosing wrong, here's what you need to do. We had a lady here, she's very successful, owns a big company. Her son for the last 15 years has been in and out of rehab centers and inpatient facilities. And she said it's a struggle every day. I don't know if he's going to be here or not, but I've done everything I can. And I just almost have to be ready at a moment's notice.
And to let go the fact that you can even control an outcome. I have come to realize that I control nothing, right? The other thing I came to realize is that I'm not my child's savior. And as soon as I let that go, it was so freeing for me that my children have to make their own choices, and I need to allow them to make their own choices.
Wow, that's really significant. I haven't thought of that.
Yeah. It's hard because as a parent, we think we're going to carry them and we'll save them from, the ramifications and from all the ills that can happen, and we can't. Yeah,
because you had a hard life and you went through a lot of things, and one of the things we discuss is when you lose somebody to suicide, the odds go up 50% for another family member. And before Christian, you had lost your father.
Right. My father had battled bipolar his whole life, and we didn't know till he was in his 50s. Yeah. Which is the reason my life was so unstable. As a child, I didn't know. We moved around so much, and just a lot of poverty and not understanding what was going on. But like you mentioned, if a family member dies by suicide, then the other family members increases their chance by 50%. This was a statistic I didn't know. Yeah. Right? I didn't know that beforehand. And while I was very open with my kids, my thought is I'm going to tell them this knowing that if I tell them that their grandfather died by suicide, then they won't choose that because they will see
how painful it was.
Yes, how awful it was for me. And I just remember when my dad died by suicide, I couldn't talk about it. I could not physically say he died by suicide.
Right.
And my best friends didn't know how he died.
And you're very selective when you say died by suicide. This is something that I'm just learning, is because a lot of times we say they committed suicide. And what does that make people think of?
So it makes them feel like it's a crime, that they've done something terrible. And I even would refer to my father and in the beginning, my son, that he had committed suicide. And it's a heavy feeling, that language, the use of words. And
just that switching the one word from committed to died takes away the mentality that they were, a bad guy or a felon or a person who intended to do it. And it takes away some of the pain, and some of the guilt of it.
Exactly. And helps people to reframe what they're saying and reframe the way we look at the situation. And so with my son's death, I started to go down that dark hole where, we don't talk about it. I'm just going to stay in my house and not talk about it. And within just a very short time, I realized that I had to talk about it. And by talking about it and sharing his story and my father's story, I've been able to heal from both suicides. And I actually feel closer to Christian now.
How
than
so?
Ever. Writing the story, writing his story, seeing things from his side and what he was going through and his struggles, and how maybe I could have been a better parent, a better person for him.
And you actually got a few messages.
I did.
I mean, without getting too spiritual on this, that our loved ones, once he passed away, there were a few occasions. Yes. Will you share that with?
Sure. And that's what helped me go on. Within a week of my son's passing, I had 3 different people come to me. And the message they gave me was exactly what I needed to hear, because I was feeling my son doesn't love me. My son hates me. And the message I got from 3 different people was, I have a message from your son. And at first I was like, okay, you know, like a little bit like, this is weird, right? And all three of them said, I have a message from your son. He says to tell my mother that I love her. And I just felt like him holding me and being there and trying to communicate that, Mom, it's going to be okay. It's not the end.
Right. And you believe that?
I believe that, yeah.
How has your life changed in the past 2 years?
So it's completely different. I'm very type A personality driven, goal driven. I have several businesses, and that was sort of my life, you know, and the kids were there and we would do things and just like march along and reach our goals. I really don't care about any of that stuff now.
No.
No. You know, you see all this stuff on social media about how to promote your business and how to do this. And I'm just like, yeah, I don't really care. You know, I still do what I need to do to earn a living, right? Living. But it's not my focus. My focus in 2019 and early 2020 was writing that book. And I felt such an urgency to get that book out. And I didn't know why. And then 2020 hits. And people are struggling even more with suicide ideation because they're isolated, they're hopeless, they don't know what the future holds, they're uncertain. And this is the message that we need to help them understand, is that it will be okay. You can find certainty and reach out and find connection even when it's hard. And so I felt that. And then I speak a lot. I try to do interviews, and mostly it's been podcasts or film or whatever. I will do whatever I can to get this message out. I talk to parents and to kids wherever I can.
It's amazing how your priorities shift when it comes to life and death.
Yes.
And you just go, you know, okay, my priority was this, but now it's this. Yes. And what's the most important thing I can do today? Is it to sell a product or market my company? Or is it to reach out to a parent who reaches out to their kid and saves their life?
Right.
Or helps them?
Right.
What is your goal moving forward? I mean, obviously you want to find purpose in this.
I want to share the message with as many parents as I can, that they can either heal their relationship with their children, or they can find a reason to go on living if they've come to some grief that is so very difficult. And there is always a reason to go on. And it's finding a purpose that's bigger than the grief. And that's what I've tried to do, even though it's hard. Like I said, we just went through the 2nd year anniversary of his passing just this week. It was hard. That was a hard day.
Right.
And just trying to recommit, okay, you know, it's kind of a restful day and the family will be together, but the next day, okay, now I'm feeling better. Now I can go out and continue to talk. I want to go into workplaces, work environments, and be able to talk to the employees there, because how do you handle someone whose child is terminal illness or who's had a death in their family? I know for my adult daughter, she was working in corporate America, and she had such a terrible experience.
Yeah.
You know, and as an employer, and you're trying to motivate an employee, how do you do that? Because like the carrots that you've used in the past, they're not going to work. Oh, I'll get a promotion. You're like, I don't really care. More money or more status. It just doesn't matter.
No, they're finding like social impact and community good means more than anything.
Yes, exactly. And so if I can help people in the workplace, that's where I would like to go next and start talking to them.
What would you say is the greatest advice or lesson maybe that you could give other parents who maybe this just happened to, or that might go through this?
A couple of things. First of all is that we cannot parent the way we were parented. And I'll give an example. Let's say, think of the most embarrassing thing in high school that ever happened to you. I have a pretty embarrassing one, but only 10 people knew, right? And maybe it was, 10 people or 50 people, but not 1,000 people, not 10,000 people, right? Because with social media, the impact of your mistakes are magnified. And so as parents, we need to understand that our kids are growing up in a completely different environment. Right. We need to adjust how we parent them, how we help teach them skills, coping skills, help them understand that no matter what happens, the external, they are still a whole person. They still have value no matter what happens outside, no matter what they do, they still have value. And then we as parents need to learn how to love unconditionally. And that's a really big one, because whether or not your child gets an A or an F, do you still love them the same? Whether or not they're the captain of the team, or did they get first chair in orchestra, we often put our value of our children and our value of ourselves based on their performance. And that's not going to work.
So it's easy to say that, but how do you do it?
You know what?
Or show them that you're doing that. Because again, we do tell our kids, like, I tell mine sometimes, I might not always like you. You might not always like me. And that's okay. But I always love you.
Yes.
I am always here for you. I love you no matter what, through anything.
Yes.
I'll do anything for you. But saying it and having them understand it are two different things.
It's still showing up when they don't do the thing that you want them to do, or what they didn't follow your advice. It's when they come to you and say, Mom, I'm pregnant, or Mom, I'm gay. What do you do? How do you respond? And how I would have responded a couple years ago is very different from how I respond now, how I would respond now. And it's just like, okay, what do you plan to do about that? How can I support you in your decision now that this has happened? I think of my daughter, who is 20 and came home with a tattoo on the side of her foot, you know, which honestly 2 years ago would have been like, oh no, not in our house, right? And I just looked at that, and not only was the reaction, I was just like, oh, it's mountains. You've always loved the mountains, dear. That's what I told her. But I just looked inside my heart, and I'm like, I didn't feel this judgment or pain or anything. I just said, not my deal, right? I'm not in charge.
Yeah.
Not in charge. And if we can get to that point where we understand that other people are living their lives and they're doing what will bring them happiness, and our value and our perceptions of things don't have to be the same.
It's
okay.
hard though, again, as a parent, because you feel like your children's actions are
reflection of you.
They're a reflection of you and how
yeah.
you raised them and what you
yes.
think. And so, you know, when they're really doing something different than what you would do or expect, it's a little bit challenging.
Yep. I went through that when my son died. I immediately thought, oh my goodness, what are the neighbors going to think, you know, about what's going on in the Galley household, or me as a parent. And I had to quickly get over that and realize that if I'm going to help other people, it's not about whether I was a good parent or not. It's not about what was Christian struggling with. It's how can my story help someone else so that they don't have to go through this. That was my whole motivation.
Yeah.
If I can help one parent avoid what my husband and I have been through, I will have saved a lot of grief and pain and trauma.
I love that. And I think that that's so true. That's something that each of us can do, is stop the judgment. Stop trying to pretend or look at your neighbor and say, I wonder why their kid turned out this way, or I wonder why their kid died by suicide, or, you know, whatever it is. It's like you look at it, and I think that we're all kind of guilty of that. I've been on a mission to, like, choose kindness, choose kindness. That's what I try to say. After volunteering at the hospital for the past 6 years, I would have patients who just lost a child or a parent or a spouse, and then they have to get out and drive on the road. And they're distracted and they're driving stupid, and you get behind them and you're like yelling at them or flipping them off, and it's like, you have no idea what that person went through. And when I almost lost my daughter the first time, I was driving 100 miles an hour on the freeway, and I was weaving and passing cars, and I'm sure people were mad at me. And I say, choose kindness.
Right.
When your
Because we don't
neighbors,
know.
with whoever it is, we don't know.
You know, I say, but for the grace of God, there go I, right? And just allow people grace wherever they are, and however they show up, they're trying to show up the best way they know how.
When your son passed away, speaking of showing up, people often do want to show up. What would you tell them? Because it's intimidating. It's like, oh man, that person just lost a loved one through this. I don't know what to say. I don't know what to do. What should they do and say? You know what? At first, just be really careful not to bombard them, because they're getting a lot of visitors. And it was really hard for us to talk about it and to relive that emotion over and over again. So we actually had to have a few days hiatus before we could really start to talk to people again, right?
having food brought in was great. At first we were like, no, we're independent. We could do it on our own.
We can order a pizza. That's what we do every day.
You know, but people, just the outpouring of love, it was just so much, and they wanted to help. And so we said, okay. And in retrospect, I'm very grateful for that, because all mundane tasks stopped. We stopped cooking. We would have eaten toast if they hadn't brought in food. And my husband was so distraught, he stopped eating. He ate maybe 500 calories a day. He lost 15 pounds in a week.
Wow.
He lost another 15 pounds within the next 2 weeks. So 30 pounds in a week. Excuse me, in a month. 30 pounds in a month. And so you can just imagine the grief, right? And that he's going through. For people to just show up and you don't have to say a lot, you know, just, I love you, I care about you, we're praying for you, and if there's anything we can do, and if you see a need, then go ahead and just step in and do it.
Yeah, don't, I mean, we're all guilty of it. I know I say it sometimes if I really don't want to help. Let me know if you need anything. That's like, please don't call me.
Yeah.
But when people actually do something, it means so much. And, you know, people were saying, well, can I bring you something? And I was the same way. Like, one, it's okay to let people serve you. They need to get blessings. You need to receive. Receiving is just as important as giving. And a lot of us are givers, but we never want to receive.
Right.
And so, you know, even I had people in my neighborhood after this happened say, hey, can we bring you this, or can we do that? And at first I was like, no. And then I thought, yeah. But I would say, and I don't know if you feel the same, it was very uncomfortable to me, and I felt violated when people would say, well, what happened? Well, why did she do it? Or, you know, all these things.
Right.
And I'm like, don't ask me these questions. It's not your place.
Right.
If I want you to know, I'll tell you.
Right.
How about you just say, hey, we're praying for you, we love you, we support you, here's some bread, or here's something.
Right. I would totally agree with you. Is if you're going to show up, don't show up as, you know, trying to be nosy or gossipy. Just show up and say, I'm here to love you, and I'm here to help you. Not here to judge you, not
Here's
here to
cookies.
find out. Yes. and keep the visits fairly short, honestly.
Yeah.
It's very emotional for the other family. It's hard.
How are your kids doing?
They're doing better. You know, like I said, I have a younger daughter that still hasn't read the book. She has a harder time even talking about Christian, because they were so close. We did have the chance to have a couple of talks about it, so at least she can talk about Christian now to me. And I know she's talking to a few other people, because she said, Mom, could I have a couple of your books to give to some of my friends, because they're either there is a suicide in the family, or somebody's struggling or something like that. And I'm like, that's great, because that tells me she's having conversations, even if she can't have them with me.
That's good. Do you worry about them knowing that statistic?
I do, and I've had to have really frank conversations at times, and I'm more in tune to seeing when things are off, and kind of helping them know that if life feels overwhelming, it's okay. Take a step back, maybe take some things off your plate. You don't have to do it all right now. And if things didn't happen exactly the way you thought they should, you know, especially with the older daughter going into a new career this last year. She switched jobs right before COVID started, and then she's switching, and then it totally changes for her, the picture that she thought she would be doing. And I just said, you know what, it's not a big deal. It's not as big a deal as you might think it is. It will be okay.
What would you say to Christian right now? If he were sitting in this room and watching this, what would you want him to know?
I would tell Christian that I love you very much, and that I feel that he's accomplished his mission. And his mission, I believe, was to help me to become a more Christ-like person. And I would say he's totally done that. I'm a completely different person. I just have so much love and compassion for other people.
And you owe that to him.
Yeah.
Isn't it interesting in life how our greatest heartaches and sorrows and challenges can end up being the biggest blessing?
It's a hard blessing, but I just feel that I feel him so close to me when I share his story, and when I try to help people understand that he would have made a different choice if he could do it over again.
I believe that. And I believe that for a lot of people. I think that most people who attempt suicide or go through with it, wish they could have woke up.
Yes.
They wish they could have seen
Yes.
this. I mean, thankfully, with my belief system, I believe that we're all going to be reunited, and that this isn't the end, and this is just a transition, and that he is over on the other side giving messages, and I'm sure he's very proud of what you've done.
And I've felt that. I felt him, you know, just saying, "Go, Mom," and I know he's proud that I'm doing this for him.
Is there anything else that you would like to leave us with? Like, how can we get information, and
Sure.
how can we both support you and also find resources?
Sure. So my book is on Amazon. It's called Learning to Breathe Again, Choosing to Heal After Losing a Loved One to Suicide. It's also on my website, larkdeangalley.com. And I would encourage people, if you are feeling suicidal, or if maybe you're struggling with a child and you're not sure what's going on, help them to know that you love them and that you will support them and you will walk beside them until you find a solution that helps them feel better. You can also Google, you know, free suicide prevention resources in my area. There is a lot out there. There are grief support groups if you've lost someone. Also other groups where maybe you can talk if you're having that suicide ideation and need to understand and just get a better grip on what really matters and how many people care about you. The impact, it's been calculated, of losing one person to suicide, it's like 112 people are personally impacted by that. I know Christian's friends have reached out to me. His friends are grieving and struggling, and they came by my house. I offered free books to all his friends, you know, please come by the house, pick it up, so I could see them and talk to them. And just to other people that might have, his former teachers have reached out to me. And they're just so shocked and sad because a lot of them didn't see it either.
It's one of the things that I think is tragic. It's, you know, my father-in-law passed away recently, and at the funeral everybody sends flowers and they send all the food and they do all this thing, and I just think, what if we did that daily or weekly or annually for people we love? What if we just sent something to them to let them know, hey, you're loved right now while you're alive? And often we're guilty of just not showing our love and our appreciation and the impact that people are making until it's too late. So I would challenge you all to do that. Reach out to somebody today.
Text them.
Text them, call them, send a note, write a letter. I got a card in the mail the other day. I thought it was fantastic, snail mail.
Yeah.
And I mean, cookies, like whatever it is, just something.
A message. I'm so thankful you're in my life. You know, do this to nieces and nephews, people that look up to you, right? And you can just say, I'm so thankful that you're in my life. You don't know if that small message is going to make a difference for them and help them stay in the game.
I'll share one quick story before we wrap, because I just thought of that. One day I was stressed out from work, you know, but I felt prompted to stop by. I had a silly dog that kept chewing up her leash, and I thought, I'm going to just stop at the dollar store and pick up a leash, because she chewed through 3 already. I'm just going to pick up 3 more. And I go in and I'm slightly annoyed because some people are talking and taking a long time, and this lady's coughing all over, and I'm like, oh my gosh, I just want to get my leash. And then I hear the conversation between a girl who walks in, and it's like, oh, hi, so-and-so, hi. And the girl goes, the older lady goes, what are you doing here? She goes, well, I haven't eaten in 3 days. And she's like, well, so you're here to get groceries? Yeah. And that just ate at me. I'm pushing my cart around the store trying to find the dog leashes, and it's just like, why hasn't she eaten? Why hasn't she eaten? And so I finally find her in the store, and I walk up to her and I said, I'm sorry I overheard your conversation, but why haven't you eaten in a few days? She goes, well, my brother just died. I was in foster care. I'm pretty much homeless. I'm living over here and I don't have anyone. And just, I was like, wow, I couldn't believe that. And I said, okay, well, you know, let me help you. Let's see what we can do. Let's get some food and do some things. And as we're standing there, I felt this overwhelming message, like your friends might have got a message that said, you need to tell her this. And so I looked at her and I said, I have to give you this message, and I know this seems kind of strange. I said, but you have to promise me you're not going to hurt yourself. And she just starts crying. She goes, how did you know? How did you know? And I said, how did I know what? She goes, I was going to kill myself tonight. I said, well, I don't know. I just know that I'm here right now, and the Spirit told me that you have to promise me you won't do it. And she cried, and we hugged, and she said, okay, I won't do it. And that's been almost 5 years ago. She's got a little daughter. We keep in touch. And it was that one little thing. It was just me taking the time to go, I got this impression and priorities.
Right.
And I thought, this is awkward, but I'm going to talk to this girl. And she struggles with mental health, and I'm encouraging her all the time. I went and I brought her a gift, and I said just the other day, I'm so proud of you for making it to this point.
Yes.
You've made it 5 years when you didn't want to live another day.
And that changed her life, or changed her daughter's life, and how that ripple effect. And I think I've learned from my father's suicide and my son's suicide is like, never leave with angry words.
No. I love that. What will be the last thing that you say to your loved one? Make sure you always leave them better than you found them. Make sure you always end things in love. Never say things you regret.
Yeah.
And that will haunt you. It will haunt you. There's still ways to make peace. So there's a lot of good. And I know, I can't even imagine what you're going through. I can't. And I do feel a little bit of guilt sometimes because I'm like, I still have my kid and we still have hope.
No guilt.
I know. I need to let that go.
But if you look at your situation, you know, you realize I have another chance, right? And hopefully it goes well for them, right? I mean,
We're
because
trying.
Right, exactly. You don't know. In my situation, I woke up every day thinking that things were fine. Whereas I have friends who struggle every day where they don't know if their kid would make it that day. And every day it goes like that. I don't know that I could operate like that every day.
It's gut-wrenching.
Yes.
I mean, talking to the father whose son's attempted suicide 6 times.
Yes.
And it's so hard. It's so hurtful. And they try everything. And the lady I spoke to, she said she spent $1 million on mental health for her kids.
As a parent, you will do anything to help your children, to help them. And just, so I would say, you know, wherever we are in our stories, whatever the story is for someone, use that story to motivate you into helping others to wake up to what's going on.
Don't keep it a secret. Don't keep it in. Talk about it. Bring it to light. Bring awareness, because we're all going, if you haven't personally considered suicide, if you don't have a loved one who has attempted or taken their life, you're going to know someone. So don't let it be taboo. Let's bring it out. Let's talk about it. Let's learn how to cope. Let's deal with these things. I'm fighting to get it into schools for education. We have PE, we have physical education. Why don't we have mental education? Why don't we do coping skills, depression, anxiety, how to handle this and how to deal with it? And so I think that we don't want anyone to be in our shoes. And it's okay if you want to try to judge us. And you might say, oh, you did this wrong or you did that wrong. No, I don't care what you say. I'm trying to do something right. And I'm trying to prevent you from ever being in these shoes because you don't want to be. It's uncomfortable and painful. So thank you for watching or listening. Please keep a lookout for the people that you love and do the best you can every day. If you need resources, reach out. We're working on that right now, and we'll talk to you next time.
Thanks.
Thanks for tuning in to Mental Health Helps. If you're an expert or you have a story you would like to share, please reach out to us at gooddeedrevolution.org. If you or a loved one is experiencing a mental health crisis, please call the National Suicide Lifeline at 1-800-273-TALK or 988 come July 2022.